Hi everyone, this is Amanda again, and I'm going to now show you my layers in Photoshop where I created this image of my daughter in black and white. Let me just go ahead and tap on the final image. So this is the final black and white image, and you probably just watched a video, and if you haven't, go back and watch it, where I brought this into Lightroom as a straight out of camera shot. I adjusted my white balance. I made some initial tweaks to the image. I converted it to black and white. I pulled on my histogram. I showed you guys some before and after tricks using your history panel. So definitely go back and watch that if you aren't coming to this video after watching that. So you want to watch that one first because I did do some raw processing in Lightroom with this image. And now here's all of the layers that I use. I do use a lot of layers, and I never flatten any of my layers. If you watch the next video in this series, it's me editing in Photoshop a little girl in a field and there's some flowers around her. That is also a black and white that I showed on the Candid class, how I use some different techniques in Photoshop to achieve that image. So as you saw in that video, or as you will see if you haven't watched it yet, I never flatten any of my layers in Photoshop. Most of these are adjustment layers, so they're not taking up a whole lot of room at all. The layers that do take up a lot of room are going to be these pixel layers. Do you see the pixel layer actually has a little miniature picture in the layers panel? That's because there are actual pixels in there. It's a pixel layer. So I'm actually, here's my original background layer. So that's one pixel layer. Right here, I basically doubled the size of this file with this pixel layer. And then another pixel layer, I tripled it. And then another pixel layer, I quadrupled it. So you don't want to use a lot of pixel layers, but there are some things in Photoshop that you just cannot do without a pixel layer. You can't dodge and burn on a transparent layer. This is a transparent layer. Do you see this right here? It's got the little gray checkerboard. That's a transparent layer. Again, there's really not a whole lot of space or memory that's tied up in a transparent layer. And then all of these other layers are adjustment layers where you see this little circle with the black and white. Those are adjustment layers, and again, those aren't huge file adder honors to forgive my grammar. I need more coffee this morning. So you don't want to use a ton of pixel layers. It will quadruple the size of your file, but you do need them for doing things like liquefying, sharpening, dodging and burning, removing distracting objects. What else do you need a pixel layer for? Blurring, creative blur that I will show in the next video. And if you haven't seen that yet on the Candid class, I show 3 different types of blur that you can use in Photoshop. You do need a pixel layer to do that because you're manipulating pixels. These other ones, I'm just adjusting things. Those are adjustment layers. And a transparent layer, you basically can just brush on a certain adjustment, whether it's clone stamping or I'm trying to think of some other things, just brushing on a certain effect onto your image. So anyway, so this is how the image came in from Lightroom. Watch the previous video to see the straight out of camera and the Lightroom adjustments that I made. And I definitely showed you some cool tips and tricks and shortcuts to use when using Lightroom. I converted it there. I have not used any presets. In this, for the Candid class, I did not want to say, oh, I used a preset to do this, because you don't need presets and actions to do things. Now, do I normally use presets and actions? Yeah, I kind of do, just to kind of speed it up. But when I was teaching it, I didn't want to use those because for a student to have to feel like they need to buy something, I didn't want you guys to feel like that. You can do all of this without presets and actions. You just have to know what you're doing, and you know what you're doing by practicing, by learning, by taking in as much information as you can. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. I'm not gonna, this isn't a watch me edit, unfortunately, just because I've already created all these layers and I was messing around. Most of my editing, I just screw around and see what happens. But I am going to show you step by step and take you through the layers, and hopefully as you see them build on, you'll be able to see how I got from the background layer that came in from Lightroom to the final image, which I think is a really pretty picture. Now, if I were going to critique this image, it's not an awesome image. It really isn't. I love my daughter's face here. This is so her. So that's why I wanted to edit it. To be honest with you, this is a merry-go-round horse. We're at Disney World, and this is a carousel. Um, and so this is wildly distracting and weird for me. If I was just going to critique this image, my first thought would be, what is this big thing here? And this is the snout of the merry-go-round horse. You can see like his the straps of his like, I don't know, saddle thing or whatever, and this is like a flower. So anyway, it's kind of a weird image, but I edited it because I really loved my daughter's face, and I wanted to do an edit of what I would call a classic black and white portrait. So this is the background, and then this is the final image, which I really like it. And I know what this random thing is, so I don't really care. But anyway, so let's go through my layers. This is the first layer I did, which is a levels layer. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use quick mask mode in order to selectively adjust parts of your image. One thing that I do when I'm editing is I add light and contrast to my subject. I do that through levels and curves layers primarily. And then I remove light and contrast from other places in the image. So I'll actually edit various parts of the image all individually, which you can do in Photoshop, which is so cool. You can kind of do it in Lightroom, but it's totally inefficient to try to do that in Lightroom. If you're only a Lightroom person, that's fine. You can use your adjustment brush, but it is nowhere near as precise or powerful as Photoshop. So I highly recommend doing the Photoshop monthly plan. It's $10 a month. I've been doing it for probably 4 or 5 years, and it's the best $10 a month that I spend because I could not create the pictures I do without having both Lightroom and Photoshop. So that's my plug right there. So this is a levels layer where I just brought a little bit of contrast and light to her face using the quick mask mode. This one again is another levels layer. I brought a little light and contrast to her hair. Which again, in a black and white image, you really want to do that. You definitely want to bring a lot of contrast to the different textures in your image, like her hair. And if you look at the mask here, you can see the mask. The white part is what's revealed in that adjustment layer. If I wanted to see the adjustment, I could click on this black and white circle, double tap it, and you can see what I did here is this white part was here. It always starts out where we're at 0, 1.0, and 255. What I did is I nudged this little guy here so that it was touching the histogram. I can adjust my midtones here, but I didn't do that in this adjustment. I just basically brightened up the highlights in her hair by moving this little white slider guy in a little bit. I could also move him in a little bit, but actually my histogram is right up against this left wall, so I'm just going to leave that alone. So that's what I did with that adjustment. Here's another levels layer. What did I do here? Let's see if I can figure it out. And sometimes maybe I was just messing around, or it could just be a rogue levels layer. I don't see any difference. I don't see anything on my mask. Oh, you know what? I think I do see it now. I know what I did now. Yeah, you just got to look. Okay, so what I did is I added a little bit of warmth into the image. Let me turn off the adjustment on and off again. So this is off, on, off, on. Do you see how it takes on a slight, like pinkish, warmish effect? If you look at my histogram up here, look at this histogram here. All of a sudden, I tap it on and you see a bump in these reds. What I did is, let me show you one more time. I'm going to open up my levels layer. Right now I'm in my RGB channel. I'm going to go to my red channel. I'm going to go to my output level. Normally this would be 0. I increased it to 5. So that is what I did. I just brought a little bit of pink to the image. Instead of having a black and white that to the eye looks a little bit green, I added a little bit of red to make it just a little bit warm. And it's very, very subtle. As you can see, I mean, Now I can see it because I'm looking for it. Initially, I was like, what is this layer? But that's what I did with that layer. You can also do that with a color balance adjustment. You can tap on this guy and add a little bit of magenta or red. Again, the key is to go light because you don't want, I mean, you don't want like a pink image. I mean, that's just not my deal. If that's how your style is and you want to roll with that, then go with it. That's just not my style. I want it to be more of a classic black and white, but I do want it to have just a touch of warmth in it. Okay, so here's another curves layer. What did I do with this guy? Oh, it looks like I added a little bit of matte effect. Let me double tap this. Yep, I added a matte by taking the lower, this bottom little square guy. At the moment, I can't remember what that's called, but there is a name for this little guy, but I moved him up just a little bit so you can see that there, and it adds a little bit of a matte effect. Now, if you look at my mask, I brushed the matte effect off of my subject. A matte effect reduces contrast, and I do not want to reduce contrast on my subject. I don't care whether it's a black and white or a color image. You want the contrast and light to be on your subject. Here's another levels layer. Now what I did here is I actually, do you see these three masks all in a row? And you're like, wow, those look the same. You know, am I brushing? You know, am I just that good? No, all I do is I hold down Alt or Option. I'm going to tap on this guy. Alt or Option, and I'm going to drag it up and drop it down. Now I want to, I actually don't want to do that because I just wanted to show that to you. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on that. Actually, I don't need to. I'm just going to go back one. I'm going to hit Alt Option Command Z, and it should take that away. That's kind of like your back button in Photoshop is I'm sorry. Alt Option Command Z is your back button in Photoshop, or you could go up here to your history panel and move along. Whoa, hey, yeah, see, that's no bueno. Okay, so let's see. This was my pink layer. Here I added the matte effect. On this image, this is a levels layer. On this layer, I added a haze to the background. Do you see that haze? That again is reducing contrast. I brushed it off, or actually I moved my layer mask off, up to take that haze off of my subject. I don't want it on my subject. I only want it on the background because I want the viewer's eyes to be drawn to the subject, which will have the most light and contrast in the image. Here's a curves layer. Let's see what this one's about. Okay. When I add a matte effect and a haze effect, it actually has the effect of brightening or lightening up my background in my image, and I actually like the background to stay a little darker. So what I did here is I had a curves layer and I deepened the shadows. So see this little dot, this little point right here? I just dropped it down ever so slightly to darken up the background, and again I kept the same mask because I don't want to darken up my subject. I added an exposure layer. What I did here, and you're like, oh, I darkened it. What I did is I actually played around with the gamma correction. I didn't really mess with the exposure in this. I always mess with exposure in Lightroom, and if I'm making adjustments to the brightness of an image in Photoshop, I do that with levels and curves. I actually don't use the exposure layers or adjustment layers for doing that. But the gamma correction is a little cool trick that I learned from Erica Boughton of Erica Eldridge Photos on Instagram. She's fabulous, and she is hosting the Insta Inspire retreat, which is coming up. Sign up if you haven't done that already. There's my plug there, Miss Erica. But she showed me how to adjust this gamma correction. So it starts off at 1.0, and then what I did is I moved it to the right a little bit, and it just adds some pretty cool contrast, and it darkens up the image. And so it was here and here. And I kind of like it. I kind of think it looks cool. I think it almost looks Nikki Boone-ish. Do you guys know who Nikki Boone is? You should. Her black and whites are amazing, and they're very deep and rich and dark, but really great. And I'm betting you she probably uses that gamma correction. I don't know, but I'm betting that she does because her images definitely have a richness to them in the shadows. Here's a brightness and contrast. Another one that I added. Let's see what I did to this one. Oh, I just tapped on the contrast. I think when I was thinking about doing a watch me edit, I just wanted to show that one. Now, if you look at the layer mask here, I'm going to hit my backslash key on my keyboard. You can see that I actually used a black brush to remove this adjustment from her lips. And I'm actually going to do it a little bit there too, from her lips and from her eyes, because I did not want to darken up her lips and her eyes. This looks really creepy. I'm going to hit backslash again. So again, it was here, and then I added contrast to the image, but I didn't want to add that to her lips and eyes because it darkened them too much and I didn't like how that looked. All right, here's my first pixel layer. The way I add a pixel layer is I use a shortcut on my keyboard, Shift, Alt, Option, Command, E. You're going to see a lot of that on the next video with the girl in the field. That is the way that I create a stamp visible pixel layer. That means that I've maintained all of my adjustment layers in case I need to go back to them, but I can add a pixel layer. Now here's the downfall of this. Any layers I add above the stamp visible layer will be based on this as kind of my new background. So let's just say I get to the end of my image and I realize, I really hate what I did down here. I'm going to have to basically start over from my first stamp visible layer, because again, everything on top of that is going to basically have all of the adjustments before it on this image here. But I could, if I wanted to, it would save me time. Rather than going back to the background, I could start over from here. Or I could toss out this pixel layer and all of the layers on top of it will show through. So I hope that makes sense. I know that's a little wonky if you're not familiar with how layers work in Photoshop, but that is the way that I do it because I often find mistakes that I need to go back and correct, and I don't want to start over from scratch. So that's how I do it. So that's my first pixel layer. So what did I do on this pixel layer? It looks like I sharpened her a little bit. Let me see if I can figure out what I did here. It's a little bit harder on a pixel layer because on a pixel layer, and let's see, let me go to my mask and hit the backslash key. Looks like I probably sharpened the image, which I would have done. I can either do like a smart sharpen or a high pass filter, but I felt like the eyeball then got too sharp because if you look at the before and after, you can see the sharpness in the hair especially, but I don't want my eyeballs to get too sharp. You guys, if you're over sharpening your eyeballs, it doesn't look good. Trust me, it just doesn't look good. So I mentioned this at the Candid class that I have this weird mental thing where if I'm scrolling Instagram and I come across your picture, and if it's a great picture, but then the eyeballs are so sharp, they're like beaming out of the picture at me, I won't click the like button. I won't tap the heart, you guys, because in my mind, I'm like, I just can't like that picture because it's so over sharpened. So anyway, I'm very careful not to over sharpen my eyeballs. And again, you could, I mean, I think the hair looks okay. You just don't want to go nutso with it. So I added some sharpening here. I wouldn't want to add a ton more sharpening, like as I'm exporting the image or something like that. So, okay, so here's another levels layer. What did I do with this one? Let me see. I'm just going to tap it on and off and see if I can figure out what I did. Okay. So I moved, okay. I did something to her eyeballs. All right, so let me hit my backslash key. Yep. Do you see how it's red everywhere else, which means it's black everywhere else? And the adjustment is showing through, and you can kind of see on the mask. I added a levels layer to add some contrast to her irises. That gives the effect of a sharpening, but without getting like too crazy over sharp. So just look at her. Actually, let me hit the Z for zoom. Let me see if we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to add some contrast to her. So this is before, after, before, after. It's very, I see it right here. It's very subtle. It's very subtle. Command 0 to get back out. All right, here's another curves layer. Oh, I brightened it. So it was super, super hot. And all of my kids, y'all, have like these dark circles under their eyes. I swear they get sleep. But sometimes it just doesn't look like it. So I did a few things to mitigate those dark circles under her eyes. It was really hot. I think they probably had a little bit of sun on their face too. So the first thing that I did is I bumped the midtones with a curves layer, and you can see backslash where I applied that adjustment, and you can see what that adjustment is. I just brought this little point just up a notch, and I just wanted to brighten up those dark circles under her eyes a little bit. So that's what I did there. I'm betting this transparent layer, which I added by just adding a new layer down here. I bet you that's my clone stamping. So when it could be clone stamping, or it could also be that I used my brush tool at a super low flow, like I'm talking maybe 1 or 2% flow. Even my clone stamp, I would have used maybe 2 or 3% clone stamp flow. And what I did there is probably either using my brush tool or clone stamping to, again, just brighten that up just a little bit and to get rid of these lines. She had these like really harsh lines, I felt. Do you see that line right there? I didn't like that. So I would have clone stamped or used my brush tool to kind of mitigate those raccoon eyes that she had. So Command 0 to get out. Here you can see in my layers palette, I added a vignette to the image. And so you can see how it's dark on the outside. The adjustment shows through in the inside, so I brightened the inside. What I did is I took my curve here and I bumped up the midtones right here just a little bit, so you can see the effect that I had. And then I used a radial gradient on my mask to only have that adjustment show through in the middle of the image. I go through my gradients and how I use those on masks in the next video, so I'm not going to show you that right now. But it's super cool and fast, and it's a lot faster than using a brush as well. So that's what I did here. Let's see. Oh, okay. It was bugging me that her mouth, like her lips, looked so dark, like she was wearing like dark red lipstick. So I didn't like that. And so what I did there is I just, again, added another curves layer to bump the midtones, and I just brushed that onto her lips where I thought it just looked really dark. So I just brushed that on there. Now you can see I added another stamp visible pixel layer, which is Shift Alt Option Command E. Let me go there. Oh, let me go to this one. All right, so in this one, it looks like, I sharpened. Looks like I sharpened again here. And again, I could have used a high pass or a Smart Sharpen layer. And I brushed it ever so slightly on this piece of hair and on the eyes. So I'll show you, and that red is the backslash key. So this is before, after, before, after. Let's zoom in and see if we can see that a little bit more. Whoa, that was probably too much. Oh, yeah. Okay, do you see the difference? Okay, so this is before the layer, the sharpening, and that's after. That's a major difference that I actually couldn't see when I was zoomed out pretty far. So before, after makes a big difference when you're zoomed in pretty close. I added a brightness and contrast layer here. I think I was probably just messing around. So let me see what I did there. I bumped up the contrast quite a bit, actually. So let me see the before and after of that one. Before, after. Oh, you know what? Look at the layer mask. I'm going to hit backslash. Okay, so here's what I did. I bumped up the contrast significantly, trying to get her freckles to show a little bit more. So that's what I did. So let's just see if that had any effect. Before, after, not really, but that's what I was going for. That's what I was shooting for. You can see it a little bit here on her nose, but that's what I was going for. Command 0. And then I have just one more layer. Okay, so I did a bunch of things on this layer. This is a pixel layer, a stamp visible pixel layer. Shift Alt Option Command E. Here's where I did my dodging and burning and removing of distractions. So I'm going to turn it off, and I want to draw your attention to this like bright part right here sticking up from her head. I don't like stuff sticking out from my subjects' heads. I don't like horizons going through the heads. I don't like tree branches shooting out of their heads. So anytime I see something shooting out of somebody's head, unless it's nice and blurry in the background, like maybe this bokeh, I'm not too concerned with that. But this was pretty strong coming out of her head, and so I didn't like that, so I removed it. And the way I removed it was I first would have lassoed it, then I would have pressed Shift Delete, Content Aware Fill, and then it would have done an okay job. Then I probably would have used my brush and my clone stamp to kind of fill in so that it looked more natural, because it actually does look pretty natural. You don't really notice too much of that. No one would have noticed that if I wouldn't have told you. And then I also dodged and burned, probably burned actually, the random horse snout here. And then the background over here too. I really want the brightest part of my image to be my subject. And if I go Command minus, 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 when you're looking at the picture when it's super small in front of you, Command minus, you're seeing all of the different distractions. So I'm seeing this bright part of the image here. I'm seeing that it's bright here. It's real bright here. Now I don't mind light or brightness coming in from the left side of the frame, because I think compositionally that's pleasing to me. I like my light coming in from the left side of the image. Most of you that have watched me edit before know that I often will flip horizontally my images. If the light's coming in from the right side, I'll flip it so it comes in from the left, because your eyes read from left to right. So I like the light coming in from the left and going into the right. But you can see that this is really bright and distracting. So I just tried to darken it and dull it a little more so that it just wouldn't pull your eye away from my daughter's eye. I think the focal point really that I want you to see as a viewer is just the way her eye is kind of sparkling and looking off into the distance. So that's really what I wanted you to see. So in this final pixel layer, I burned the parts of the image and got rid of things in the image that I thought were distracting. So Command 0 to go back to full frame. So this is what came in from Lightroom, which wasn't bad at all. Actually, it was a huge improvement from the original conversion to black and white, which was really gray and dull and just kind of muddy. And then I really added a ton of contrast to my subject and removed it from other places in the frame. So I'm happy with this image. This is a picture of my daughter that I really like because it shows kind of her expression and personality. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. It's not a true watch me edit, but my next video of the girl in the field is a true watch me edit where I go through layer by layer as I'm actually editing it, and you'll be able to see all of that in action. So I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.